recommendation says until such time as.
Yep.
Is there
So
a time frame?
That's the next part of it. At this point in time, we
I think, John,
haven't undertaken that work at this point in time.
We need to save John from a little bit of the embarrassment around this. This was a political recommendation that was crafted at a political level. It wasn't a staff recommendation. The debate that I think is going on in your head may have happened around the table, Councillor Casey, and I don't think, if my recollection serves me well, that it was universally supported, but obviously supported enough.
Absolutely not, Madam Chair.
Was that a reasonable summary, Member Taipere? I think it is. So
just on the recommendation, though, at what stage are they going to be? Are we actively seeking to identify and map them, or is that?
So as John has indicated previously, there's a whole piece of work that has been undertaken by a heritage team working with mana whenua on identifying more accurately sites of significance and sites of value, and that work has been a 3-year work program, and at some stage they will be bringing back to ADC recommendations of changes to the operative unitary plan.
So it'll be a plan change after August.
Yeah.
So is there a time frame on it though? I mean, is it in this year's work plan, next year's work plan?
It was a 3-year, and I think they're into year 2 of the 3-year program. So.
They're making good progress, and we do need to report that back to committee and just an update on progress with that work. I think there are about 100 sites that are being looked at quite extensively with mana whenua. We're taking a lead from mana whenua rather than say, let's focus on the sites that were in the unitary plan. In some cases, mana whenua has expressed a preference for looking at other sites that were never in the unitary plan at all. So it's not as clear cut as that.
Can I just ask a stupid question, just because it's in my head? But would a lava cave in a private land be a site of value or a site of significance?
I think the lava caves, I understand, are protected.
Well, they're protected as geological sites, or outstanding natural features in some
Right,
cases.
so they don't come into this bit of it?
Well, they could if mana whenua had identified them as being of significance in the operative plan. But the circles, the sites of value, the 3,600 were based on archaeology, and a lava cave is not archaeology, unless there was some archaeology within the cave. That's geology. Yeah.
You could have bones in it, though.
But some of those lava caves would clearly be of significance to mana whenua, but do you know?
So, just, am I able to ask another stupid question? You know, when we reduced the size of the circle
Could have anything in it, Wayne.
from 200 metres to 50 metres, how many sites were outside of that?
How many sites were outside of that? So I don't
Did we
quite-
keep all the sites, just reduce the circle? We didn't lose any sites because of that?
We didn't lose any because of that, but as in the presentation, if we just go back to it, there was that list of reasons why the council agreed that a number of sites should be removed.
Duplication, accuracy.
So some were non-Maori, some were not accurate in terms of the location, some we had no cultural values ascribed to them by mana whenua. So the 3,600 council's case was to reduce that to 2,213.
And what was the effect of the 200 to 100 to 50 metres?
It just reduces the mapped extent of it and where you would need a consent to do earthworks and where you wouldn't need a
So
consent
you can
to
get
do
closer
earthworks.
to it to dig, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, those are very useful questions, actually, Councillor. Councillor Cashmore?
Yeah, just further from John, we had a presentation about these new sites identified at the Rural Advisory Panel last month. There's 104 new sites identified, 36 of which are on private land. And there's work ongoing with the landowners on that as we speak.
Nice. Well done.
Yep. Good. Right. Councillor Wayne.
John, just on the end here where it mentions the process associated with cultural impact assessments was worked through at mediation between the council and submitters. Is that last little bit referring to those bullet point items that appear before? So are they an indication of what was worked through in mediation?
That's correct. And there certainly wasn't full agreement, but very active in that mediation. We had mana whenua and the infrastructure providers and some of the developers, and certainly some of those parties were largely in agreement with where council got to with those changes on that slide.
And when you say work through it, mediation, does it follow that there's been agreement, or where is it at?
Well,
Are people still at odds?
Yes, some people were still at odds and presented a different argument before the hearings panel, and I guess that bullet point is just flagging that there were submitters who turned up before the panel and said, we now support the provisions as proposed by the council with these changes.
Good.
Oh, thank you. Member Taipere.
Oh, kia ora, Madam Chair. Thank you for the updates. It's been good. Just following on that one about that resolution agreed to remove sites and places of value overlay on private land and such as signs so accurately identified and mapped. So when they are accurately identified and mapped, are they going to be included into a schedule, or does that have to be a plan change? I mean, it's just, to me, it's been like delaying the inevitable, really. But what's the process once they're accurately identified and mapped?
They would then need to come through committee to then be approved to go out as part of a plan change for submissions and a hearing to then be included in the unitary plan. They would have immediate legal effect from the point that council agreed, if the council was to agree to notify a plan change. But I guess this would all be beyond August this year. It's still possible that the panel recommends that all 3,600 are retained.
Oh, of course, we live in hope.
So we've got to get past that point before looking at the future. But in the future, it would require a plan change.
So, but I mean, I'm working on the basis that a proposal's been put forward to remove sites and stuff like that. So I'm just more interested about, because it's not removing them because they don't exist. It's just removing them because they didn't have accurate information to evidence their existence. That's right. And so, according to this resolution, or my interpretation, of course, when you get that information, they will go in, and this council will agree to it because they just said they just wanted information to show that it accurately exists. I don't think we'd have another debate about whether they should be there or not. I just think we're having a debate, is the accurate information provided?
I was
just trying to clarify.
I was just going to let Member Taipere finish, and I think that explains the process, but we don't need to debate it.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, we will. Any other questions? Let's move on to our next item.
All right, last presentation for today. Maori Land and Treaty was the topic before the hearings panel. There are 4 parts to this topic, 4 main parts. We have some Auckland-wide objectives, policies and rules specifically for Maori land. We have some Auckland-wide, city-wide provisions for treaty settlement land in the unitary plan. We have Maori purpose zone, which is applied on a number of sites in Auckland. And then there are some definitions of what treaty settlement land is. In particular, that's where the definition thing comes up as a big topic. So in the plan that went out for submissions, the notified plan, in terms of the first topic, Maori land and treaty settlement land, in the regional policy statement, there were objectives and policies supporting, enabling social, cultural and economic development by Maori. There were some Auckland-wide rules providing some additional development opportunities on Maori land and treaty settlement land, and that was mainly for papakainga in rural areas and for marae in rural and, I guess, urban areas as well. So a bit more flexibility on Maori land and treaty settlement land than in the normal case of general land. Additional development was provided for as a discretionary activity beyond papakainga and marae, and that was called an integrated Maori development. It was a full discretionary activity, but on Maori land, treaty settlement land, and in the Maori purpose zone, there was a provision for what was called an integrated Maori development, which was a much broader type of activity than papakainga or marae. It encompassed a range of activities. Moving on to the Maori purpose zone, It provided for dwellings, care centres, marae, small-scale business use, subject to controls on things like density, building coverage, etc. Provided for some additional development, as I mentioned, for what was described as an integrated Māori development, defined in the plan. The Māori purpose zone was largely applied to sites that were identified with special zonings in the legacy operative district plans. Any new ones added? There were a few new ones added, new sites?
Yep.
Okay. So, summary of submitters' views on those different categories there. Some submitters sought additional permitted, controlled and restricted discretionary activities on Māori land, treaty settlement land. Some wanted development to be more enabling, where the land is also subject to some of the natural heritage overlays, such as the ones we've discussed today. So that much Māori land in Auckland is also in areas of ecological significance or outstanding natural landscapes. So there's a strong congruence between Māori land and some of those overlays that we've discussed today. So mana whenua in particular was seeking some additional flexibility there given those constraints and the historical reasons as well for why that land is in the locations it's in, and the small amount of land that actually exists as Māori land. Some submitters also sought changes to the objectives and policies to further enable new infrastructure in on Māori land or treaty settlement land. Council's position at the hearing was to support that overall approach of retaining the Māori purpose zone, of having special provisions for Māori land and treaty settlement land. There was a proposed increase to up to 20 dwellings at a density of 1 dwelling per 4,000 square metres as a restricted discretionary activity on Māori land in rural areas. So that's more permissive than the approach in the notified plan and more permissive than on general land. It was proposed to broaden the definition of treaty settlement land to include land were transferred to a company where the claimant group, iwi, still retain the controlling interest. So there was an argument there by iwi that in some cases they may have the land through a treaty settlement and they may go into partnership with a private entity. In the original definition, that would have no longer been classed as treaty settlement land. A lot of discussion there, and this was the definition that we as council proposed to the panel in the hearings. Also land acquired by iwi by way of right of first refusal from the Crown where a property is specifically identified in treaty settlement legislation was another category of broadening the definition of treaty settlement land. And there were amendments proposed by the council to support the need to balance the protection of natural heritage with Māori social, cultural and economic well-being through amendments to the significant ecological area overlay, and I touched on that in the SEA presentation. There was some additional provision for development on Māori land that also has an SEA covering that land.
How about an ONL?
Not for ONLs. So it's only agreed to for significant ecological areas. And that's an overview of the Māori land, treaty settlement land topic.
Oh, that was clear cut.
Yeah, why not outstanding natural landscapes?
Well, Jim?
Well, that was something that was discussed, some analysis.
There would have been submissions for that.
Yeah, but it wasn't, the submission wasn't for just limiting it to significant ecological areas. It was to other natural heritage and natural other overlays. But the decision was made is that Māori land is quite disproportionately affected by SEAs than in other surrounding general land. But it wasn't affected to the same extent as by outstanding natural landscapes. So the actual, or if Māori land is affected by an outstanding natural landscape, it's only a small proportion of the site, and often it's in quite hilly, steep areas of the site rather than the flatter area, which would be more likely for development. Whereas a significant ecological area was more broad. There's even some examples of Māori land which had almost 100% or 100% coverage.
Yeah,
Significant ecological area.
I guess I don't quite follow that logic, because if it's not affecting, various proposals for various purposes, in principle, why wouldn't you keep it?
Madam Chair, we're starting to get into that territory
Okay,
of justifying
okay.
the council's approach
All
before
right.
the hearings, and that's a bit of a dangerous
Nice try,
territory.
Wayne.
Wait till the 22nd.
I'd just like to know, that's all.
22nd.
Councillor, I couldn't quite get the thrust of your question, but if we are starting to unpack, that's not very useful.